Welcome back, seekers of wisdom, to day 25 of our 30-day Wisdom Quest Challenge. We have journeyed far on this quest, exploring the architecture of our inner and outer worlds. The splash is the moment of your birth, a brief and energetic disruption of the stillness. The moment the stone sinks beneath the surface and vanishes from sight is the moment of your death. The life itself is the journey through the water, the arc from air to abyss. But the story, the true story of your impact, does not end there. From the point where you entered the water, ripples begin to spread, moving outward in silent, ever-widening circles. They travel long after the stone is gone, touching distant and unseen shores, gently altering the landscape of the entire pond. These ripples are your legacy. Some lives are like pebbles, creating small, gentle, and quickly fading rings. Other lives are like great boulders, and their ripples are powerful waves that change the shape of the shoreline for generations to come. Today, we are not just thinking about the stone of our life, but about the ripples we choose to create. We are exploring the profound concept of legacy and impact. What will you leave behind? We will tell a story about a city of forgotten names and an old stonemason who, at the end of his life, learned that the most enduring monuments are not made of stone at all. We have learned to build habits, to find our values, to practice generosity. We are learning to live with intention. Today, we turn our gaze to the horizon of our lives, to the inevitable twilight, and we ask the ultimate, and perhaps most human, question of a life well lived. When the brief and beautiful story of our life is over, what will remain? What will we leave behind? Imagine your life is a single stone tossed into a vast, still pond. The splash is the moment of your birth, a brief and energetic disruption of the stillness. The moment the stone sinks beneath the surface and vanishes from sight is the moment of your death. The life itself is the journey through the water, the arc from air to abyss. But the story, the true story of your impact, does not end there. From the point where you entered the water, ripples begin to spread, moving outward in silent, ever-widening circles. They travel long after the stone is gone, touching distant and unseen shores, gently altering the landscape of the entire pond. These ripples are your legacy. Some lives are like pebbles, creating small, gentle, and quickly fading rings. Other lives are like great boulders, and their ripples are powerful waves that change the shape of the shoreline for generations to come. Today, we are not just thinking about the stone of our life, but about the ripples we choose to create. We are exploring the profound concept of legacy and impact. What will you leave behind? We will tell a story about a city of forgotten names and an old stonemason who, at the end of his life, learned that the most enduring monuments are not made of stone at all. Our story is set in the ancient and solemn city of Chyros, a place that was obsessed with history, memory, and the judgment of time. In the exact center of the city was a vast, circular plaza, and in the center of that plaza stood the Wall of Names. This wall was not built, but was said to have risen from the earth at the city's founding. It was a single, seamless piece of pale, moon-white stone that rose 100 feet into the air, so smooth it felt like polished bone. It was on this wall that the name of every citizen of Chyros was carved upon their death. The city's most honored and feared profession was not that of a ruler or a merchant, but of the stonemason, the one entrusted with this sacred and final duty. But the stone of the wall was enchanted with a strange and unforgiving magic, a magic that reflected the city's deepest value. It was a living testament to a person's life. If a person had lived a life of pure self-interest, a life with no lasting positive impact on the world, a life whose ripples were small and self-contained, the wind and rain of time would quickly erode their name from the stone's surface. Within a year, sometimes within a season, it would be as if they had never existed. However, if a person's life had created a positive ripple effect, if their actions had contributed to the well-being of others and the flourishing of the community, Their name would remain etched and would even begin to glow with a soft inner light. The brightness of this light, the permanence of their legacy, was said to be directly proportional to the positive contribution they had made to the lives they had touched. The plaza was a beautiful and heartbreaking place. It was filled with thousands of glowing names from the city's long and storied history, some shining with the gentle light of fireflies, others with the steady brightness of distant stars. These names were a source of constant inspiration for all who saw them. But the newest sections of the wall, where the recently deceased were carved, were always tragically dim. Most new names, even those of the wealthiest merchants, the most powerful generals, and the most celebrated artists, would appear for a few seasons, flicker with a pathetic, brief light, and then fade into a smooth, anonymous blankness. The city of Chyros, through the magic of its wall, remembered only what was worth remembering. In this city lived an old stonemason named Elias. For 50 long years, he had been the one entrusted with carving the names upon the wall. His hands were gnarled and strong as old tree roots. His eyes were sharp from a lifetime of focusing on fine details, and his skill with the chisel was legendary. He could carve a name with such grace and precision that it seemed to sing from the stone. He was nearing the end of his own life, and a quiet, cold fear had begun to take root in his heart. He had spent his entire existence carving the legacies of other people. He had etched the names of kings who were now forgotten, of great artists whose works had crumbled, of wealthy merchants whose fortunes had been scattered to the winds. But he himself had built nothing. He had no grand statue in the plaza, no great book in the library, no children to carry on his name and tell his story. He was a humble record keeper of other people's lives, with no discernible purpose of his own beyond his craft. His deepest fear, a fear that kept him awake in the lonely hours of the night, was that when his time came his own name, carved by his apprentice, would fade from the wall as quickly and as silently as a whisper on the wind, leaving no trace that he had ever lived. He was a man consumed with the question of his own legacy. Elias' internal conflict was this growing anxiety about his own mortality, and they call it potential meaninglessness of his life as work. This fear drove him to an obsession. He began to study the wall not as a craftsman, but as a detective, a scholar of departed souls. He spent his evenings not in his workshop, but in the great silent plaza, a lonely figure tracing the glowing names with his old, calloused fingers, trying to decipher their secret. At first, he held the common belief of his city, that a great legacy required a great, singular, and famous act. He expected the brightest names to belong to the great generals who won famous battles, or the merchants who built the tallest towers, or the artists who created the most celebrated sculptures that adorned the homes of the powerful. But as he studied the wall with his craftsman's eye for detail, he discovered a profound and confusing mystery. Many of the names of the most famous and powerful people in the city's history were either completely gone or were just faint, flickering embers like dying coals. He knew this because he had carved many of them himself. He remembered carving the name of the great General Vorn, a man who had conquered 3 neighboring kingdoms and expanded the city's influence. Elias had used his finest tools, carving the name with deep, proud letters. But now, only 30 years later, the name was almost gone, a faint shadow on the stone. He remembered carving the name of the wealthy merchant Kasha, who had owned half the city and had built the great market hall. Her name had faded in a single decade. This confused him and challenged his society's entire definition of a meaningful life. The wall seemed to judge by a different, secret metric. His obsession then shifted. He began to focus only on the names that shone the brightest, the ones that burned like steady, eternal stars on the wall, their light a warm and constant comfort in the cool plaza. And he noticed a strange and beautiful pattern. The most luminous names, the legacies that had truly endured the test of time, belonged not to the kings and warriors, but to seemingly ordinary individuals whose stories had been all but forgotten by the official histories, the grand narratives of the city. There was the name Anya, a glassblower from centuries past that shone with the light of 100 lamps. There was the name Orion, a mapmaker whose name glowed with the clarity of a perfect dawn. And brightest of all, so bright it was sometimes hard to look at directly, a name that seemed to be the very heart of the wall, was the name Ilara, who, according to the dusty city records, had been a simple gardener. Elias became consumed with the story of this woman, Ilara. How could a humble gardener, a woman who owned nothing but a small patch of dirt and a simple hut, have created a legacy more enduring than that of emperors who commanded armies? He decided to investigate her life, to become an archaeologist of her impact, to uncover the secret of her luminous name. He sought out the oldest people in the city, the great-great-grandchildren of those who had lived in Ilara's time. He visited the oral historians and the keepers of forgotten lore. He asked them not for the grand histories, but for the small stories, the kitchen table memories that had been passed down. This section of our story is Elias's investigation, his journey into the past to understand the true nature of a lasting contribution. He first found an old woman whose family had been weavers for generations, a family known for their kindness and their charity. Ilara? The woman said, her eyes looking into the distant past as she worked her loom. My grandmother used to tell me stories of her. She lived during the time of the Great Blight, when the city was starving and the silos of the rich were sealed. Ilara had a small garden in a forgotten courtyard. It was said to be magical, for it thrived when all else was dying. But my grandmother said the magic was not in the soil. It was in Ilara herself. She gave away everything she grew. She never kept the best for herself. Her garden was not a private hoard. It was the city's lifeline. She kept hundreds of people from starving. My grandmother said Ilara taught the city that generosity was not a weakness, but a form of strength, a way of creating more for everyone. The weaver paused, her hands still. Our family tradition of setting aside 1/10 of all we make for those in need. That started with her. She gave my great-grandmother a cloak when she was cold. We have been paying that single gift forward ever since. This was the first ripple Elias saw. Next, Elias found an old man who was a retired teacher, a man with a gentle face and wise eyes. Ilara the gardener, the old teacher said with a warm smile. Yes, she is a legend in my family. She is the reason our family became teachers. My great-grandfather was a boy during the Blight, an orphan living in the streets, stealing to survive. He told me that Ilara did more than just give him food, which she did every day. One afternoon, she found him trying to grow a small, withered plant in a broken pot. Instead of scolding him for his poor technique, she sat with him. She gave him a healthy seed from her own garden, and she gave him a small, unused patch of ground behind her own hut. She taught him patiently, day after day, how to prepare the soil, how to water the seed, how to care for the plant. She gave him more than a meal. She gave him the knowledge and the dignity to feed himself. That boy, my great-grandfather, grew up to establish the city's first communal gardens, which fed thousands and taught generations the art of cultivation. He always said, Ilara did not just give me a seed. She planted a forest that is still growing today. This was the second, wider ripple. Finally, Elias found a woman who was a keeper of the city's oral histories. She told him the most important story of all. It was the story of the Great Fire, a time when a tower had burned, and the isolated citizens had been too afraid to help their trapped neighbor. The histories written by the powerful say that a great hero saved the man that day, the historian said, her voice low. She organized small acts of mutual aid, a mender fixing a cloak for a baker, who in turn gave the mender a loaf of bread. She was weaving the people together with the invisible, luminous threads of compassion and trust. When the fire came, a man named Kale, a man she had personally mentored, was the first to run out and help. But others followed him. They followed because Elara had already taught them how to think of their neighbors as part of themselves. She did not fight the fire. After weeks of this investigation, after gathering these small, quiet stories of a simple gardener, Elias sat alone in the plaza one night, staring up at the brilliant, radiant name of Elara on the wall. He had his epiphany. It was a moment of profound, earth-shattering clarity that rearranged his entire understanding of the world. A great legacy was not a monument one builds for oneself. It was not a single, grand, heroic act that everyone would remember. A true and lasting legacy was the unseen garden you plant in the hearts and lives of others. It was the quiet, cumulative power of 1,000 small daily actions that contribute to a larger purpose. Elara's impact was not in a single harvest. It was in the countless seeds she had scattered, seeds of kindness, of knowledge of community that had grown into a vast and thriving forest long after she herself had returned to the earth. Her life was a perfect, stunning example of the ripple effect of positive actions. He finally understood. He had spent his life carving the names of people who had tried to build their legacy like a great, solid statual monument to the ego. But those statues, made of the stone of pride and accomplishment, had crumbled under the gentle, persistent erosion of time. Elara had built her legacy like a garden, a living, growing, self-propagating system of nourishment and connection that had outlived stone and steel. He realized that a true vision for impact is not about the grandeur of the action, but about the quality of its intention and the breadth of its positive ripples. He returned to his workshop, the place where he had spent 50 years recording the endings of other people's stories. But for the first time, he was thinking about his own. The old fear was gone, replaced by a quiet, focused sense of purpose. He looked around his workshop. He had no great wealth to give away, no grand artistic vision to unveil. All he had was his skill, his remaining time, and a pile of leftover stones. His eyes fell upon a small, simple leadstone on his desk, a leftover piece from a past project, a small piece of adversity he had never gotten around to discarding. He smiled. He had always thought his legacy had to be carved from the finest marble. He now realized it could be forged from the humblest lead. He began the process of defining his personal legacy. He decided his legacy would not be a statue of himself in the plaza. It would not be his name carved in the grandest style. His legacy would be in his actions from this day forward. This was his moment of decision-making. His climax was not a single dramatic event, but the beginning of a new, quiet, daily practice. He picked up his simplest tools, left his workshop, and walked toward the city's most neglected place, the children's park at the very edge of the city. The falling action of Elias's story is a quiet, beautiful montage of his remaining years. It is a story not of grand projects, but of small, meaningful contributions. We see him in the children's park, which had been a place of dust and broken swings, a place of potential joy left to decay. He spends a month patiently and skillfully carving beautiful new swings from sturdy ironwood, their surfaces smooth and safe for small hands. He doesn't ask for payment or recognition. His reward is the sound of children's laughter that soon fills the air. We see him walking through the poor quarter of the city, his eyes now open to the small needs he had been blind to before. He notices the broken and uneven cobblestones that are a hazard to the elderly. And so, he spends the next year of his life, day by day, using his master skills to repair the streets, not because he is asked to, but because he sees a need and he has the skill to meet it. He uses his craft not for fame, but for service. We see him take on a young, eager apprentice, a boy from a poor family whom everyone else had dismissed as having no talent. Elias sees not a lack of talent, but a lack of opportunity. His workshop is no longer a solitary place, but a thriving school run by his now master apprentice, who is in turn teaching a new generation. Elias is not afraid. He is at peace, surrounded by the generations of children who had played on his swings, the families who walked safely on his repaired streets, and the young artisans to whom he had given a purpose. He knew his life had been one of profound meaning and contribution. He knew his ripples would continue long after he was gone. He doesn't just teach the boy how to hold a chisel. He teaches him the importance of care, of patience, of integrity. He passes on not just his skill, but his wisdom, the very wisdom he learned from studying the life of Alara. He is planting a seed. Each of these is a small daily action, a tiny ripple sent out into the pond of his community. He is not building a monument. He is tending a garden. The resolution of our story shows Elias on his deathbed. Many years later, he is a very old man. His workshop is no longer a solitary place, but a thriving school run by his now master apprentice, who is in turn teaching a new generation. Elias is not afraid. He is at peace, surrounded by the generations of children who had played on his swings, the families who walked safely on his repaired streets, and the young artisans to whom he had given a purpose. He knew his life had been one of profound meaning and contribution. He knew his ripples would continue long after he was gone. Apé 1. The final scene of our story takes place a year after his death. We see his apprentice, now the city's master stonemason, standing before the great wall of names. With tears of love and respect in his eyes, he carefully and beautifully carves his master's name, Elias. As he finishes the last stroke, the name begins to glow. It starts as a soft, warm light, but it grows brighter and brighter until it shines with the steady, brilliant intensity of a star, brighter than any of the kings or merchants around it. It was a testament to a legacy built not on what he owned or what he took, but on the countless small ripples of kindness, skill, and love he had sent out into the world. His quiet life had become a loud and eternal inspiration for the future of his city. But something else happened the day Elias's name was carved into the wall of names, something so quiet, so sacred, that even time itself seemed to pause in reverence. As the final stroke of the chisel echoed softly into the morning mist, the plaza was utterly still. No applause, no fanfare, just silence, deep and reverent, as if the city itself were holding its breath. Then slowly, imperceptibly at first, the name Elias began to shimmer, not just with the gentle glow of the honored, but with a brilliance so profound it illuminated not just the wall, but the faces of those gathered to witness it. And then the light spread. The glow crept outward like dawn across the stone plaza. It moved with a life of its own, touching the cobblestones Elias had once repaired. It shimmered along the metal railings of the swings he had carved for the city's children. It curled through the hallways of the small school that had once been his workshop, now alive with laughter, tools, and questions. It was as if the legacy of Elias could no longer be confined to the wall, because it had never lived there to begin with. It had always lived in people, and one by one they began to arrive. The children, now grown, who once played on his swings. The elders who had walked safely down streets he repaired. The young men and women who had been apprentices, taught not only how to carve stone, but how to shape character. And those stories wove together into something grander than any statue, a living tapestry of impact, stitched together by quiet acts of care. And others, too, those Elias had never met, but who had been touched by his ripples. A woman who received a warm meal at a soup kitchen started by one of his students. A traveler who had read an inscription above the school's door and turned back from despair. A mother whose daughter smiled for the first time in weeks after swinging on a smooth, wooden seat crafted by Elias's steady hands. They came not to mourn, but to remember. Not with speeches, but with stories. The city, once obsessed with grandeur, began to awaken to a gentler truth. For generations, they had told themselves that the purpose of life was to be remembered. But now, they began to understand. The purpose of life is not to leave behind a memory. It is to leave behind a movement of kindness, of quiet service, of choosing depth over display, of teaching others not just what we know, but who we are, of turning daily routines into sacred rituals of care. And so a shift occurred not in marble or policy, but in consciousness. People began to look at legacy differently. They no longer measured it in monuments, but in the invisible architecture of their lives. How many seeds did I plant today that might grow long after I am gone? How many hands did I lift? How many minds did I open? How many hearts did I soften? Did I contribute to something that would outlive me, not in my name, but in its impact? And so came the ritual of ripples, a new tradition. Every year on the day Elias's name was carved, the citizens of Chyros would gather in the plaza, not to honor the great or the grand, but to share one simple story, a moment in which someone else's small act changed the course of their life. A bread shared, a word spoken, a hand extended, a lesson taught. They were those who had healed, taught, fed, built, gave, stayed, loved, a smile offered in the exact moment it was needed most. Children were invited to listen. Elders were invited to speak. Everyone was invited to feel. And as the sun set each year, casting golden light upon the wall of names, the names that glowed the brightest were not those who had ruled, conquered, or amassed. In this sacred retelling, Elias and Elara became more than figures of history. They became archetypes. Elara, the gardener of souls. Elias, the mason of meaning. And the deeper wisdom was this: neither of them set out to be remembered. They set out to be useful, to tend what was in front of them, to repair what was broken, to teach what they had learned, to serve with their hands and hearts alike. The stone must weather so that others may shape it anew. The light must fade from one generation so that it can rise again in another. And because they did, their names outlived fire, time, and even memory. They lived on not in stone, but in the spiritual DNA of the city itself. The city of Chyros, once obsessed with permanence, finally understood that the truest permanence is not in what endures, but in what evolves. The garden must decay so the next can grow. And this, dear seeker of wisdom, is your legacy as well. You are not just a visitor in this world. You are a builder of its future. You are a ripple maker, whether you choose to be or not. Every word you speak echoes. Every choice you make radiates. Every kindness you offer plants itself in soil you may never see, in lives you may never know, in moments long after your own story has ended. So do not ask, will I be remembered? Ask instead, will the world be better because I was here? Will someone breathe easier, stand taller, dream further, live kinder because of you? Will your words echo as hope? Will your work outlive your name? Will your love take root in someone else's garden? Because that is legacy. Legacy is not what remains of you. It is what remains through you. And so we end this day not with a conclusion, but with a call. Let your life be the stone. Let your kindness be the ripple. Let your presence be the proof that ordinary days, lived with extraordinary care, are the true builders of eternity. Because long after your voice falls silent, long after your image fades from photographs, long after your name is no longer spoken aloud, your ripples will still move, your light will still shine. And somewhere, a stranger will smile and not know why, but we will know. And the wall will know. And the world will remember not your name, but your gift. And that is enough.